Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Mafia and Gangsters video. Yes indeed, it is that time. Let's go ahead and let's start a whole new series here based on your suggestions. This one in fact is based on one of your newer suggestions, so please keep them coming. I've enjoyed seeing them and I'll be doing them throughout the next coming weeks. And this is a perfect example of what I'm looking for. While it's not necessarily Mafia related, it is definitely gangster related, and it has to do with someone from the early 1900s. I have never heard of this name before, so it's great to find out all this interesting info. And then on top of that, it's definitely something that I wanted to share here because of all the fascinating tie-ins, not just associated with the FBI, but also other things that I'll highlight here in a minute. So great stuff when it comes to sharing this particular criminal. In fact, he's a career criminal. At one point, he was essentially public enemy number one when it came to the FBI's most wanted list. And it has to do with this. You're looking at him now. As always, like most of these names, he goes by Alvin Karpis, but he had a particular nickname, and in this case, he was known as Creepy. So Alvin Creepy Karpis. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with this lifelong gangster. So who was this Alvin Creepy Karpis? Well, the first thing I wanted to mention, the reason why he was called creepy was because he was known not just for like his stare that you're looking at here, that was definitely unsettling, but even when he was smiling, it was considered to be a very sinister smile. I'm guessing even when he was just, let's say, naturally smiling, let's say he was in a good mood, it still came across as something that just creeped people out. So that's essentially how he got that nickname. But he was someone that was born back on August 10th, 1907, there in Montreal, Quebec. And then when he moved into the United States, in Topeka, Kansas, that's when he essentially started his lifelong career as a criminal. In fact, it was pretty much at an early age, at age 10, no less, he was already running around with gamblers, bootleggers, and other type of gangsters out there. And he was also selling his own form of pornography out there on the street. So at one point, in fact, when he was just in 1926, when I believe he was just 19 years old, he was already sentenced, in this case 10 years, to a reformatory in Hutchinson, Kansas. And at that point, that pretty much started his jail sentences, and that was for attempted burglary. But it was shortly after that he escaped, and then he decided to move back in with his parents. I think at one point I was reading he only did so because one of his partners, one of his crime partners, was in turn captured and put to prison, and so he couldn't really do much at that point. So he decided to go move in with his parents, and that was somewhere in Kansas City, Missouri. But it didn't take long for, in this case, for Alvin to get caught yet again, in this case stealing a car, went back to the reformatory, and that's when things changed for him. In fact, this is where his notoriety came. He met a gentleman by the name of Fred Barker, who you're looking at here, who at that point was in prison for burglary, especially when it comes to banks. So this guy, Fred Barker, and then Alvin Karpis, they got along well, and they decided to form some kind of gang. Like, this was something involving not just Barker's family, which consisted of several brothers, and then also the mother, who became known as Ma Barker, but it also included Alvin Karpis and then several of his accomplices. So all of them formed together a very violent gang, one that went around actually creating a set of formidable actions throughout the 1930s. In fact, their actions included robberies, hostage situations, even killing people, anyone who got in their way. In fact, at one point, they actually killed a sheriff. Both Karpis and Fred Barker killed a sheriff by the name of Roy Kelly because this poor sheriff was investigating the robbery that they were committing at a time, and this was in West Plains, Missouri. So this was definitely a gang who was very violent when it came to their actions, and they did so nonchalantly. Like, they were pretty much just going city by city, just finding any kind of weak marks that they could, and then that's when they would do their violent action and then just move to another location. In fact, after that killing happened with the poor sheriff, they decided to flee to St. Paul, Missouri. One interesting thing I wanted to mention too about Ma Barker, which you're looking at a picture of here, she actually almost has her own notoriety. She was someone that, according to the FBI, but you have to take this with a grain of salt, because a lot of people state that the way the FBI made it, they kind of ever exaggerated her influence, but according to them, she was the criminal mastermind, the genius behind a lot of the actions that this gang would make. So she was the one that was spearheading things, and she was the one that was leading. In fact, her influence today is so much so that if you've seen, for example, the DuckTales cartoon, the older one featuring Ma Beagle, that's her. So essentially, if you see any kind of TV show or film that contains a mother-like figure in a gang of sorts, and her name starts with Ma, that's essentially where it comes from. It comes from Ma Barker, and Ma Barker actually ended up being killed by the FBI during a shootout whenever the FBI came while they were trying to capture part of the Barker gang, including who they thought was Alvin Karpis somewhere there too. But again, it's exaggerated. A lot of people think so because in other cases, not even just from people that look into the history of what happened with the gang and some of their actions, but also by Alvin himself, he stated that Ma was someone that wasn't really involved within any of the crimes. In fact, they kept her separate from it. She definitely joined them whenever they moved to other locations here and there, but she was not part of it on purpose because they didn't really want her to get involved. They didn't think that she would be able to handle a lot of the things. So it's a lot of he said, she said type stuff when it comes to that kind of situation. You have the FBI saying one thing, and then you have others saying another thing, and it's left up into the air as to what truly the influence was of Ma Barker. But I just wanted to mention that because she was definitely a long part of the Barker gang, the Karpis and the Barker gang when it came to a lot of their actions. But yes, as far as Alvin, he was described as being someone super smart. He was the one that was actually doing a lot of the thinking and the planning, and supposedly had an eidetic memory, which is a photographic memory when it came to a lot of these getaways that he would do. In fact, at one point, they did have a pretty successful streak where they were kidnapping influential people. For example, they kidnapped a gentleman by the name of William Ham, who was someone that was a millionaire by a Minnesota brewer company. And so whenever they kidnapped him, they ended up holding him ransom, and they ended up getting $100,000 from that ransom, and then they let him go. They did it yet again with another person, in this case a banker, a guy by the name of Edward Bremer, and they held him ransomed for $200,000, and that was a lot of money. Essentially, the way it looks today, it was around $4 million. If you had $200,000 back in 1933, that's essentially what it came to, and that made them a score when it came to that. But that last thing is actually what ended up being the downfall, or led to the downfall of Alvin Creepy Karpis, because that gentleman, Edward Bremer, was actually a friend of President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt. And in fact, he talked about it within one of his infamous Firesides chats. And he was stating that the FBI and the local police would definitely step up when it came to their pursuit of these criminals. That's basically all it took. Kidnap someone that was a friend of the president, and then you'll feel their lashes afterward when it came to the punishment that they were going to get. So the FBI and local police, they all banded in a stronger effort. In fact, at this point, Herbert Hoover got involved when it came to these things. In fact, he was someone that he was J. Edgar Hoover. He was there at that point, kind of running things when it came to the FBI, but he decided to take a more personal approach because he wanted to make sure that, based on what happened, of course, with the evidence, with the president, and then what else was happening with all these actions that Alvin Karpis and his gang and the others from Barker were doing as well, and they were not getting caught. This was embarrassment, and an actual embarrassment to the FBI, and so he wanted to take it on a more personal level, and that's when he branded him public enemy number one. He actually took Alvin Karpis and he made him number one when it came to being captured. And so that's essentially what led to his downfall. There was a huge mass reorganization to try to find more evidence, more tips. It took take a little bit. Like when I was reading the information, some of the tips had turned out to be red herrings, and they were able to go to certain areas thinking that they were about to get Alvin, but as it turns out, it was just something else entirely different. They came pretty close, in fact, in 1935, whenever the FBI located him in Atlantic City, but he was able to get away. He actually ran away, not just with another person, a guy by the name of Harry Campbell, but he had an 8-month pregnant girlfriend with him as well. Karpis's own 8-month pregnant girlfriend was there, and she was hit in the thigh by some kind of shot that was fired by his his accomplice, Mr. Campbell. And so when that happened, he actually left her behind, and then that's how he was able to escape. So he kind of laid low at that point, but the FBI was still there tracking him, trying to find them. And again, J. Edgar Hoover was doing that. It reminded me too, I forget who it was, but it was from that movie American Gangster, the one that involved Denzel Washington. I can't remember if it was Bumpy Johnson who was the one on the cover or if it was someone else, but there was a criminal that was there in that area, and he was pretty much running things openly. Like, he was flaunting so much of his criminality when it came to the drugs that he was putting on the streets, and no one could touch him because of the fact that he was not directing things. There wasn't enough evidence, in other words, to show that he was directing things personally. And then at one point, when he lined it on the cover of Time, if I'm not mistaken, that's when President, who was it? Jimmy Carter actually got involved because he was embarrassed by it. Like, he was saying, how can a criminal be on the cover of Time and then openly flaunt themselves like this, and we're not doing anything about it? So that's essentially what led to the demise of that person. And so that's what made me think about this when I was reading about Alvin Karpis and when they were kidnapping that banker. All it took, again, was, in this case, that banker being personally involved with the president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then that's led to the demise. Because here's what happened next. After a very long wait and after going a lot of back and forth, again, a lot of tips that were here and there, these FBI agents who were top of the line were finally able to locate Karpis in New Orleans. And here's where things go a little bit of a discrepancy again when it comes to the FBI. According to one end, the FBI's version, Hoover himself flew down there because he wanted to make sure that he could personally arrest, in this case, Carper. And when he did so, he actually did it by actually going straight to the car that Carper was in, and in a moment of excitement was able to reach into the car, grab Karpis before Karpis could get anything involving like a rifle, and then personally handcuffed him. That's that version of the FBI side. And then on the other side, Alvin stated that nobody arrested him in terms of, let's say, Hoover. In fact, most of the other FBI agents did the work, and when things were safe, and then that's when he was brought out, and then that's when Hoover came on board, and then that's when they were able to officially arrest him. Like, he, in other words, took the credit for it. So there's that side as well, too. In fact, one angle I was reading was stating that not one agent during the arrest even had handcuffs at that point, and so they had to use an agent's necktie in order to make sure that his hands were there. But he was caught. He was finally caught. Alvin Creepy Karpis was finally put to jail for all of his crimes that he did, and in fact, he was sentenced to a life sentence, but with the possibility of parole somewhere down the line. He actually ended up being in Alcatraz, and he did so. He stayed there for a good while. He was the longest resident there in Alcatraz, something like 33 years or so, and I think he was eventually transferred to somewhere else once Alcatraz closed. But still, the whole point was he was there as the longest prisoner, and then when he did so, he actually met this. He met Charles Manson within one of the other prisons. In fact, I think it was McNeil Island Penitentiary that he was later transferred to, that's where he met Charles Manson and he gave him some guitar lessons. And this was, of course, before Charles Manson did a lot of things that he did afterward. But get this, after Alvin Creepy Karpis came up for some kind of parole, eventually he was paroled, 1969. That confused me a little bit because, remember, he killed that sheriff way back when, and so not only that, but holding a lot of people ransom and then doing a lot of other burglaries. I'm wondering again how he's able to get out on a life sentence like that, but he did so. He was deported to Canada, and he actually wrote 2 books, which you're looking at here. One of them was more of an autobiography, where he stated a lot of things from his side. And then the other one was his stay there in Alcatraz and his viewpoint there too. But he moved over to Canada and he was able to do all of this, and he became almost a little mini celebrity. He was able to do interviews, not just for the book tour, but he also did so for some of the other channels, like some of the news networks that were out there. And then also he was able to almost become a mentor, apparently, to one of the book people, the one that he was on with the tour. And so that just goes to show how things changed for him, completely different. And then afterward, he ended up moving in Spain. And then somewhere on August 26, 1979, he was found by authorities dead. And so it was officially ruled that it was something along the lines of a suicide because there was a large mass of sleeping pills that were found by his body. But others state that eventually Alvin Karpis' past came up to him, and that think that he was actually killed by others. So maybe there was some kind of foul play involved. Maybe there were some other criminals that he owed money to, or there were others that wanted to take revenge on him for his actions that he did to them years back. Who knows? And if there's even this angle, the idea that he would never commit suicide, and instead it was more along the lines of an accidental overdose. So you have all those angles when it comes to his death. But either way, though, he was found dead, and then right now he's buried somewhere, I believe in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. He was buried there in Spain along with one other person. I can't remember if it was someone from his family or someone else. But that's it. That's pretty much all the info associated with Alvin Karpis. Again, a lifelong gangster, someone part of an infamous violent gang there, who ended up not just being public enemy number one when it came to the FBI, but also becoming a personal manhunt for J. Edgar Hoover. And then after that, becoming a lifelong prisoner. I mean, one of the longest prisoners there after a life sentence in Alcatraz, and then creating 2 books when it came to his experiences. But if anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. I think I saw that there was an interview too that he gave to someone. I'll try to see if I can find a link on YouTube because it was an interview that he gave years back, right before he died actually, and then I'll see if I can post it so that way you get to see him there. But who knows, at least when he came out, I was reading somewhere that at that point he looked like, and he acted more like an accountant rather than a gangster. So all those years of being a hardcore criminal, it looks like things just changed towards the end. But if anyone has any more info, anything else might have missed, please post those comments below. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care.